Hi, everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and today we are going to talk about the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, these 7 Noachide laws. This is a fascinating topic. The concept of Judaism introducing an alternative religious system for people who are not Jewish raises all sorts of questions. Like, who did they think was going to keep this? There are definitely Noahides running around today, as there have been for a very long time in different places in the world. But what was the concept, right? Is this an emergence, like a natural emergence from the term ger, as we see it in the Torah, which so often seems to indicate somebody who's a fellow traveler, but isn't a Jew, even though many times we interpret ger to mean rabbinically a ger tzedek rather than a ger toshav, a full convert. Is this a way of dealing with Christianity and suggesting, no, 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 we don't want Christianity. If you don't want to be Jewish, do these 7 mitzvot? So really, just historically, it's a really interesting question. And what I want to do today is I want to think through the different ways that you could conceive of the meaning of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach and how they relate to Brit Sinai, how they relate to Taryag mitzvot. And so I'm offering 3 categories, but the truth is sometimes they bleed into each other, the categories. I'm offering 3 ways to think about it. One is just to think about the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach as common sense. Think about the 7 mitzvot that are mitzvot Bnei Noach. Dinim, you have to set up courts. Shvichut damim, you can't murder. These are all things that are common sense. Another way to look at it is to say this is a non-Jewish covenant, right? It's not just common sense and anybody would come up with it, but it's a covenant between God and non-Jews. Now, how much is that covenant considered part of the Jewish covenant, like part and parcel? How much is that thought about as independent? Leads us to a third way, which is there any element of competition in thinking about the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach? Like, are they in competition with Taryag in some way? And yes, it's true, the 7 mitzvot Bnei Noach, 6 of which are lo tases, also apply to Jewish people. But is there any competition there? So that's what I want to look at today. We're going to do what I would call like a skira klalit, like a nice big overview of what we're looking at. So first things first, when you look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Amdaf Nun Vav Amud Bet, well, really Nun Vav Amud Aleph to Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, what you see is 2 different versions of what the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach are. 2 different versions of the list, and also 2 different versions of where we would get the list from. So I want to look at that first, right? We have the list that seems to be an anonymous list that starts on Nun Vav Amud Bet, right? Ten Rabbanan, rabbis taught, Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. The Noahides have been given, meaning the children of Noach, have been given 7 laws. Dinim, set up courts, Birkat Hashem, can't curse God, Avodah Zarah, no paganism, Gilei Arayot, no improper sexual relationships, Shvichut Damim, no murder, Gezel, no stealing, Aver Minachai, no eating a limb from a living animal. Now, that last one, I sort of have a question mark about, because the other ones just seem sort of like common sense, but we'll get back to it, right? And then the Gemara says, where do we get these 7 from? Well, Rabbi Yochanan actually gets it from a pasuk. Right? He gets it from the first pasuk of tzivui, the first pasuk of commandment, where God commands a human being, and that is God commanding Adam HaRishon. God commanding Adam HaRishon, what? You can eat from all the trees except for the Eitz Hadat. And based on that, we darshan out all the psukim of the pasuk Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam lemor mikol Eitz Hagan echol tofel, etc. We darshan out all those different pieces and say this one refers to dinim, this one refers to Avodah Zarah, this one right? Now that's our first version. And our first version is very interesting. It's very interesting because, first of all, it is anchored in Adam HaRishon. It's anchored in tzivui, and it seems to be pretty common sense kind of stuff. Okay. But then there's a second version, and that second version shows up towards the end of Nun Vav Amud Bet, and that's Tana Debei Menashe's version. The Tana Debei Menashe, this is what was taught in the school of Menashe. Now, mind you, the school of Menashe was probably like a small group of people. We're not talking about like 50 people. We're probably talking about like 5 people, 10 people, right? That's the way schools were in the time of Chazal. Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. They have 7 mitzvot. Avodah Zarah, no paganism. Great. Gilui Arayot, no improper sexual behavior. Shvichot Damim, no murder. Gezel, no stealing. Aver Min HaChai, no eating limb from a live animal. Serus, you're not allowed to castrate animals. Vikilaim, and you're not allowed to employ in different ways mixtures of diverse kinds. A little bit of a different list there, right? I can't look at this list and necessarily say, well, all of these are just rational common sense because when it comes to castration, it comes to mixtures of diverse kinds, Aver Min HaChai, maybe you could say it's common sense, it's too violent, but those two, strange, right? Something else is going on, and dinim is out, right? And in addition to being a different list, it's also the way that we anchor this list in Torah is very different. Instead of using a pasuk from Adam HaRishon, where, by the way, the pasuk itself doesn't indicate much about the specifics of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, but it does indicate the first moment of tzivui of God to a human being. So it really anchors it in a sense of tzivui in mitzvah. Instead, it learns Tana Debei Menashe's list is learned from psukim that were actually said about Noach or to Noach, right? So instead of starting from the original creation, we're starting from the recreation. But it's not only that, it's important to recognize that Noach also got a set of commands. When he comes out of the Teva, he gets a set of commands. So there's another commandedness moment. But this derivation of Tana Debei Menashe is not actually going to be from commands psukim. It's also going to be from psukim that just describe punishment for things that were obviously considered to be wrong. And from punishment, you can deduce that there's a command not to do them, right? So that's how the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Bava Bet and Zayin Amud Aleph continues and says each one of these 7 is learned from a different pasuk. So, for example, Vatishachet haaretz lifnei Elokim, the earth was corrupted or literally destroyed from before God. This is the time before the flood. And Tana Debei Rabbi Menashe's school said, Rabbi Shmuel's school says, Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, B'chol makom shneimar hashchata, everywhere the term hashchata is used biblically, eino ela devar erva v'avodah zarah. That refers to licentiousness and it refers to paganism. So there you have your licentiousness and your paganism, right? And then the Gemara continues, how do we know shvichut damim? Well, that's a straight, command of God to Noach, right? Shofech dam adam b'adam damo yishafech, right? Very simple, right? What about Gezel? What about stealing? Okay, we can get that from God saying to Noach, you are allowed to eat animals, and it's going to be like Yerek Esav. So what does that mean? Eating meat is going to be like eating meat post-flood is going to be as allowed as eating grass pre-flood or eating plants pre-flood. Well, we're talking about only things that grow wild, not things that belong to someone else. So hence, no Gezel, right? Aver Min HaChai, where are we going to learn it from? Also those same psukim that are describing the heter to eat meat. And what about these last two, Serus, right? What about these last two? Castration and kilayim. So castration, it's interesting. The Gemara takes it from God's bracha, seemingly, to like a secondary creation, God's bracha that is also a tzivui. I want you to go shirtzu ba'aretz revuba, right? With Adam, it was a bracha that you're going to have for revu. And here it seems to be more of a command, like go retake, but maybe command and bracha in both. But nonetheless, it seems to me it has to be in a way that reproduction can happen, right? And kilayim also describing actually how Noach brought them onto the teva, that he brings them liminehu, that they can't be mixed minim. Okay? Very, very different derivation, right? One's from Adam, one's from Noach. one's from a tzivui that doesn't seem to be about the things, but Chazal are going to derive it, and one's from a combination of tzivuyim that seem to be about the issues themselves and learning deductively from punishments that were given. So how are we to understand how these two versions speak to our questions of common sense or covenant or competition? So I want to start with two theories that I think are very, very interesting. One is by Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg, who I think has the first book from Matan's Kidvuni series about Sukkot, which is I have on my shelf. I'm very excited to read it. So she basically suggests, she says, I think I care a lot about where the derivations are coming from, right? The derivations from the first list seem to be from Vayitzav. God gives a commandment. The derivations from the second list seem to be deduced by people getting punished, which kind of means they already should have known, right? So she says it like this. This is what she thinks about those two different kinds of derivations. The question of which sources do you look at in order to learn the 7 mitzvot Bnei Noach, היא שאלה משמעותית להבנת המהות של 7 mitzvot Bnei Noach. It's a very important question to understand the character of the 7 mitzvot Bnei Noach, ושל העולם המוסרי בכלל, and our moral universe in general. ולכן היא נתונה במחלוקת, and this is why there is a מחלוקת about it, החל מימי הגמרא, from the time of the Gemara, v'derech chachmei kol hadorot, and throughout the generations. Hamachloket mishakefet she'ela rechava yoter. The machloket represents the following bigger question: Ha'im efshar lahagia lahavana u'mechuyavut misarit rak derech tzivui eloki mefurash? Do you need an explicit revelatory commandment from God in order to be morally obligated? O sheyesh dvarim she'efshar lomar lehem she'efshar la'asik me'asecha. Right? Or maybe there are things where you can actually get them from your own mind, your own rationality. Should have known. So that's what she suggests. She looks at the fact that the first version is from a pasuk vayitzav, and the second version includes things that are Noach's generation was punished, even if they didn't get a straight tzivui, but they should have known better. And says maybe what we're looking at is the question of whether it's a tzivui or it's something that comes from your rational mind. Now, I think this is very interesting because on the one hand, where you derive it from, do you derive it from a pasuk that's indicating tzivui, 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 but doesn't really tell you the substance? Or do you derive it from people getting punished for doing these bad things? Yes, on the one hand, that does indicate one is a more revelation version, revelation inspired version, and the other one is supposed to be a common sense version. But the irony is, if you look at the list that we derive from Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam is a much more common sense list. Dinim, right? And the list that includes Serus and Kilayim is a much less intuitive list. So I think she's on to something. And in fact, I think this is the big machlok that's happened throughout time, even about the first list of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, which is derived from a pasuk that's about tzivui, but seems to be itself just common sense related. That's actually a machloket that's been going for a very long time. Should we even look at, forget the second, the Tanit B'nai Menashe version, the first version of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, that looks like common sense, but it's derived from a pasuk. Is that supposed to indicate to us that what we're looking at here is what we would call positive law, meaning the legal system is only because God told you, right? Because the law says it. Or are we looking at a system that's about common sense and what we would call natural law, right? So it's interesting. She connects it to the two different versions, but I think even within the first version itself, you have this question. We'll get back to that later. Second thing I wanted to show you that I thought was just brilliant is Dr. Devorah Steinmetz, an academic. She pointed out that the second list of Tanit B'nai Menashe, it's a very strange list. Like it's a very surprising list. Why is it getting rid of dinim? And why is it bringing in Serus and Kilayim? And so she suggests the following, and I just think it's worth thinking about. What the Bavli seems to be saying is this: for Tanit B'nai Menashe, Prohibited acts are those acts that run counter to the way the world was created. Such acts uncreate the world. They are destructive acts that bring destruction to the world, that undo the work of creation. It's noteworthy that the very next pasuk, after the two psukim cited by the Bavli as the source of the prohibition against sexual misconduct, right? Ki shchit kol basaret or kol aretz, right? That the land ended up being nishcheta, also includes the word destroys. God said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me, and behold, I shall destroy them with the earth. God's words to Noach appear that the biblical narrator has already described the destruction of the world in the verses that the Bavli brings as the source for Tana Devei Menashe's prohibition of sexual misconduct. The earth was already destroyed before God. How was it destroyed? By sexual misconduct and by avodah zarah, right? Meaning the point is, it's these things are acts that destroy the way that the world was created. And it's very fascinating because then you look at Serus and Kilayim and you say to yourself, oh, of course, castration and crossbreeding also runs counter to the way the world was created, right? It's not liminehu. It doesn't produce natural kinds. Now, this has all sorts of implications for the question of, science and what are we allowed to do and how far should we go. But suffice it to say, I think she gives a very reasonable explanation for the second list, the Tana Devei Menashe list. You may look at the first list of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach and say, oh yeah, those make total sense, common sense. When you look at the second list of Tana Devei Menashe, Tana Devei Menashe's list focuses on Noach because the people in Noach's time destroyed the world. They uncreated the world, and therefore God uncreated the world. And so what are Bnei Noach supposed to learn from this? How you're supposed to not destroy the world. And these are the ways that you don't destroy the world. Follow these 7, right? And some of these mean we don't want you to prevent the proper reproduction of animals. And some of them are, we don't want you to commit murder, right? Some of them are, we don't want you to do avodah zarah, which is just undermining the natural order, right? We don't want you creating 3-limbed animals because you're grabbing a piece off of the animal in order to eat it, right? There's all sorts of, I thought that was a really smart and interesting suggestion, which is also borne out by a certain comment in the Drashut Aran that I included there just for bonus for anybody who wants to look at it, but that's for another day. But suffice it to say, even those 2 versions of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach start our brains working. Like, what are these Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach? Are they common sense? Are they positive law? Are they about not undoing creation, right? And I actually am so excited to quote my husband here, Rabbi Yon Hain, who wrote a great paper called The Torah and the Nations of the World and the Noahide Commandments, Dual Midrashic Legacies, where he writes, and I think this is so succinct and so helpful, and it will be helpful for us right now, which is commentators and scholars have debated if the Noahide commandments represent a Jewish natural law being totally rational. Anybody could figure it out. This is like inscribed in the DNA of the universe, Kilo. Is it a separate Gentile covenant, right? Which would not just be natural law, right? It would be positive law. It would be law that God gives to people. It's not just a rational thing that anybody could figure out. Its authority is from the fact that God commands it. Or 3, are they a subsidiary of the Jewish covenant, which is also, it has its authority because God commands it. So I want to look at all of these, and then I want to add the question of competition. So let's talk about common sense or natural law. So first of all, anybody who learned our shir last week on Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, we quoted the famous Midrash Halakha on the difference between Chukim and Mishpatim. Chukim, we don't understand. Mishpatim, we would have written them ourselves, Kilo. Obviously, when you look at the list that was in that Midrash, what did the list have in there? The list had, you're not allowed to steal, you're not allowed to commit licentiousness, you're not allowed to be a pagan, you're not allowed to do paganism, you're not allowed to curse God, you're not allowed to murder. Doesn't that sound like the list that we basically look at as the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach list? It's missing dinim, it's missing Aver Menachai. Okay, but so what we're looking at is common sense, right? And that's exactly how Rav Bachi Ibn Bekuda says it. He says, look, what Bnei Noach get is they get the mitzvot sichliot. they get the mitzvot that are rational, that you can understand. What the Jewish people get are we get the mitzvot shimiot. I should say we get the mitzvot shimiot as well. We get the ones where revelation is the only way that you understand it. Right now, for Rabbeinu Bachya, that is actually an honor, right? That's an intimacy for us, right? The rest of the world gets rationality. We, the Jewish people, get something that's beyond, which is special mitzvot that we wouldn't know without God giving them to us, right? So some intimate knowledge, okay? So that's one way of looking at this. And there are academics in the 20th century who wrote all about this, right? Natural law, that's what we're looking at. And certainly if you're not using the Tanna D'Beit Menashe version, you're just using the first version, which is our kind of agreed upon version, you could see how people would come to that conclusion, even though, by the way, the pasuk that it's derived from a pasuk instead of just saying, yeah, well, of course you should do these things because, of course, these should be mitzvot b'nei Noach because they're totally logical, right? But then there are people who say, slow down, slow down, slow down. It's not just rational and anyone would do it. We have a pasuk that's being used here, a pasuk of tzivui that's being used. That indicates covenant. But what kind of covenant? What kind of covenant? Well, let's start with maybe it's part of the Sanhedrin covenant. And the strongest proponent of this is the Rambam. The Rambam says, Kol hamekabel sheva mitzvot v'nizhar la'asotan harezi mechasidei umot olam. You accept the 7 mitzvot, beautiful, you're pious among the Gentiles. V'yesh lo chalak l'olam haba, you have a share in the world to come. But look at the caveat. V'hu she'ekabel otan, it's only if a person accepts them, v'yaseh otam, and does them, mipnei shetziva bahen hakadosh baruch hu b'Torah, because God gave them in the Torah, right? Now, I still may be able to maintain some independence, but look at what comes next. V'hodianu al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu, and that God told us through Moshe, shebnei Noach mikodem nitztevu beh, that the descendants of Noach, i.e. humanity, were commanded them. But if they did them just because they're rational, that's proper, that's not what we would consider a ger toshav, meaning a Noahide. And they're not from among the pious of the nations of the world and not from among their wise. Wow, this is a really intense way of Rambam saying, nope, 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 nope. Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, they are part of the Jewish covenant. They're a covenant for non-Jews, but they're part of the Jewish covenant. And in fact, you see all of these interesting different midrashim in different places that suggest that like it's almost like the Torah is like a snowball effect, right? And the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach might be the beginning of the making of that snowball. But then we have what we would say, Bichlal Matayim Maneh, right? Within 200, you have 100, meaning within the 613, within our Jewish covenant, you have a Bnei Noach covenant, right? So let's see. So, for example, when the Torah says, Vayikach Sefer HaBrit, Vayikra Be'oznei Ha'am, that Moshe reads the Sefer HaBrit, the book of the covenant, in front of the Jewish people in Shemot Perikaf Daled. What are we talking about? What did he read to them, right? So Rebbe says, what did he read to them? Mitzvot shenitztava b'Adam Harishon. He read them the commandments that Adam Harishon got. And then mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach, and the mitzvot b'nei Noach, right? I just want you to think about this as a snowball that's getting bigger, right? Mitzvot shenitztavu b'Mitzrayim u'b'Mara, and the mitzvot that they had in Mara, right? Remember this? I mean, anybody who's listening to this right after Parsha B'Shalach, it's perfect timing. But they added mitzvot in Mara, ushar kol mitzvot kalan, and all of the rest of the mitzvot, right? This is a nice big snowball. There are actually people who indicate to think about perhaps the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach as covenantal, meaning it's not just your rational self comes up with it, but that it's covenantal, Vayitzav Hashem, right? Or Vayitzav Elokim. And I think it's interesting and not super surprising that there's a prominent rabbi from Italy. You often find Italian Jews have the most interesting perspectives on the world at large that are seem like so different than other Jewries. It is absolutely fascinating. So, there was a rabbi, an Italian rabbi. He was a Kabbalist who actually got people to join to become Bnei Noach, and he was from Italy in the 19th century. His name is Rabbi Eliyahu Ben Amo. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Ben Amozeg. I'm not sure. And I'll give you like one quote that shows up in a student of his who became a Ben Noach. We Jews have and are keeping the religion destined for the entire human race, the only religion to which Gentiles shall be subject, and by which they are to be saved, truly by the grace of God, as were our patriarchs before the law. That even is so interesting, right? The Jews are saved in this way, non-Jews are saved in that way. Now, of course, if somebody wants to become a Ger Tzedek, please, hey, join. But we each have our ways of being saved. The religion of humanity is no other than Noachism, not that it was instituted by Noah, but because it dates from the covenant made by God with humanity, right? Remember, God makes a brit with Noah after the flood, right? Covenant with humanity, it's a brit in the person of this just man. Here is the religion preserved by Israel to be transmitted to the Gentiles, right? Is a separate covenants, right? And by the way, I think it's very interesting. I don't know if we should, this is the way that I'm going to read it, but there's a great Breshit Rabbah that basically says, I don't understand, why is Mashiach coming? What is Mashiach going to do? And the Breshit Rabbah says Mashiach is going to take the Jews back from Galut and is also going to give the Bnei Noach even more laws, 30 laws. Okay, right? Meaning their covenant may expand also in its own way, right? So again, we have our common sense, rational, anybody would come up with it. We have our more covenantal, or what I'm saying is sort of positive law that it's because of a tzivoy, but is it positive law that it's part of Judaism? And I don't mean positive as in not negative. I mean posited, right? Law that is given as like a tzivoy, or is it its own independent covenant? And that brings me to my last piece here, which is competition. Are we not worried in any way about competition? Is some of this conversation about the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach going to get into that in any way? So first of all, I want to say, I don't even think that it's just about Noach. I think we actually have to look at the Torah itself. When you look as the Torah goes on, you have moments of lawmaking before Sinai, right? However, Chazal are it's very significant for Chazal to say Sinai has to be a special pivotal point that is different than anything came before. So here's a gorgeous psik to the Rav Kahana, using the pasuk from Mishlei from Eshet Chayil, Rabot Banot Asu Chayil Va'at Alit Al Kulana, right? Many women have done great things, but you are the greatest. And so Rav Yudan Bar Simon says, let me tell you what this means. Adam Harishon got 6 mitzvot, and then Noah got Aver Minachai because he was allowed to eat meat. And then Avram got Brit Milah, and Yitzchak got Brit Milah at 8 days, and Yaakov got Gid Hanashe, and Yehuda learned about Yibum with Tamar. But you Jewish people, B'Sinai Nitztava Taryag mitzvah. You got 613 mitzvot, right? So it's not just a matter of is there competition between other versions of law. It's actually trying to say Sinai has to mark something. That Brit Sinai has to mark something special and different and moving. But I do think that as you continue to learn this Gemara of, all the way from Nun Vav to Nun Tet, what you are going to see are certain moments where the question of competition really does come up. So I want to see, for example, the fact is that the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Nun Chedem Bet has v'amar Reish Lakish nochrish Shabbat chayav mita. A non-Jew who observes Shabbat has to it gets the death penalty, or I shouldn't say that, not death gets the death penalty, is obligated to death, right? Doesn't mean a Beit Din would, do that, but would be obligated in that way, at least midine shamayim, right? And that's why people who are converting to Judaism will make sure to like turn on a light at some point if they haven't completed their giur process. Shenemar, as it says, v'yom v'layla lo yishpotu. And this is amazing because it comes from post Noach, right? It's saying there, it's really trying to say, God is saying, the cycle of the world will continue. I'm not going to destroy it. But Yom Valayla lo yishbotu, they shouldn't keep Shabbat. And Mar says that's, well, actually, I'm going to skip that for a second. Ravina says, Afilu sheni b'Shabbat, even if they choose a Monday and decide to make it Shabbat. Now, I look at this and I say to myself, yeah, actually, this is complicated because we want to give people two versions. It's either you're going to be a Ben Noach, which would make you a Ger Toshav, and then you have your rules and only your rules, or you're going to be a Ger Tzedek, you're going to be a Jew, and you're going to have our rules. What we don't want is, can you just do the stuff without being Jewish and still not only stick to the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach? Question mark, right? And this point about even making Monday into a Shabbos. I mean, Judaism and Christianity, you start to see some of the parallels, and that's competition. I don't mean that in any petty sense. I mean that in a very real sense, right? This is not trying to open the door to some kind of syncretistic version of Judaism, right? You also have the machloket on Sanhedrin Nun Aleph as to whether a non-Jew, can learn Torah or be osek b'Torah, engage in Torah studies. And you have a really intense machloket here, right? Rabbi Yochanan says, Goy shosek b'Torah chayav mita. A non-Jew who engages in Torah is, obligated, at least midinei shamayim, to death. And then the Gemara says, yeah, but what about Rabbi Meir, who says, what about a non-Jew? Rabbi Meir says a non-Jew who engages in Torah study is like the Kohen Gadol. So, help me out here. Are we thinking about Judaism as, this is universal and other people should use it? Are we thinking about it as something that has to be totally separate? And the Gemara here resolves it in a way that is not necessarily replicated elsewhere and says, there's just studying Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. But here I think it really does bring up a number of different questions. And what I want to end with is just how different what Chazal do is from what Hellenistic Judaism looked like. And I mean religious Hellenistic Judaism, like the Philo version. The Hellenistic Judaism, you saw a strand that was trying to say, oh, no, Shabbos should be for everyone. Shabbos has internal value and beauty, and it should be for everyone, right? Almost trying to show how all the mitzvot are things that make the world better and make life better, and everyone should participate in them. Chazal are going in a different direction. They're basically saying, wait. There are different covenants here, or perhaps there's rational and then covenantal, but we actually want to be very careful about not mixing these different threads. So I hope this has given you food for thought on Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. Looking forward to learning together next time.